welcome back to Room 303 in Freshman English. And we are with you now on page 435 and following, the Rebecca Walker essay, Before Hip Hop Was Hip Hop. Now, just to remind, we are in unit number 3 in our freshman text, and we are introducing you to different types of nonfiction. We've already messed with a couple of models, and now we're going to play the game of, as you see it at the top of 435, independent practice. Now, I'm very interested in this essay because it stands in a different kind of relationship to the other two essays that we were working with here in this introductory comments. Learned Hand Speech, Patrick Henry's address are both kind of going to be what we would call a certain kind of historical, political kind of understanding. In this text, we're going to learn about a different kind of history that I think will be very important to you, and here's why. I've sometimes said that I think that the major difference between you guys and the time when Patrick Henry lived is your appreciation of the arts, and more particularly of music. And while many of us really treasure our music, can I say this? It's one of the things to most of the students I teach that really becomes kind of sacred to them. It matters to them. And yet I'm convinced that often students don't really have an appreciation of where that music comes from. It's historical antecedents, where it comes from, right? They know they love, for example, the artist Eminem, but they don't understand where that artist's work came from. Do you know what I mean? It's almost like it's just there sitting as a thing unto itself. And of course, if we know anything, we know that everything to the present is built on the past in some way. So we're going to take a look at this one. Well, about the text, let's read 435 at the top. Rebecca Walker's lively interest in youth culture is evident in this essay. Okay? She is a writer of magazine articles, books, essays. At the age of 25, she was named by Time magazine as one of the 50 influential American leaders under the age of 40. So in other words, she's a really important voice for us. Now we want to do two things in this essay as we get ready. One, we're very interested in what she says. Two, and maybe more interestingly for us, how she says it. That is to say, level 2B, and the ways that we're working at the rhetoric level. So let's read together. We're going to follow along. You can see, for example, number 16, it's color-coded for us. We're going to pay attention to some of that as well. If you ask, I'm reading now with you. I hope you're reading with me. Again, the challenge is to read the actual words. Don't just listen to me read it. You read along with me, and you interpret as you read as well, all right? So it's a function of trying specifically. It's trying to figure out exactly what's going on. If you ask most kids today about hip hop, they'll spit out the names of recording artists they see on TV: Eminem, P. Diddy, J-Lo, Beyonce. They'll tell you about the songs they like and the clothes they want to buy. They'll tell you about the indisputable zones of hip hop, like EO, East Orange, New Jersey, the ATL, Atlanta, Georgia, the West Side, Los Angeles, California. Neighborhoods they feel they know because they've seen them in all the glossiest, flossiest music videos. Hip-hop is natural to these kids, like air or water, just there, a part of the digital landscape that streams through their lives. Again, go back to number 16 here, tone and word choice. Does Walker's choice of words create a formal tone or an informal tone? What do you think? Most readers will say they feel that this is more like informal. In other words, they feel like already this is a different kind of tone than the Patrick Henry speech that we were looking at before, right? It's more, can I say it this way? Some freshmen will say, this is a more accessible writing style to me. I can understand it better. Of course, the point that she makes right away is the point that I was making a few seconds ago. Music is the air we breathe. Qualify how music seeps into your life at 3B already. You get in your vehicle, first thing you do, now granted you're freshmen, so maybe you don't do this yet, but you get into your vehicle when you are a driver, and one of the first things you do? Turn on music. You walk into your bedroom, what's one of the first things you do? Turn on music, right? You play video games, play them with the sound turned down. You would not play most of those video games. Why? Because music is so foundational to everything. She calls it the air you breathe. Let's keep going. Second paragraph, I watch this cultural sea change with fascination. It astounds me that hip-hop has grown into a global industry, a force that dominates youth culture from Paris to Prague, Tokyo to Timbuktu. I can't believe that in small, all-white towns like Lincoln, Nebraska, high school boys wear their clothes in the latest style. Pants sagging off their waists, sport jerseys hanging to their knees, baseball hats cocked to one side. Even in the pueblos of Mexico, where mariachi bands and old-school crooners still rule, it is hip-hop that sells cars, sodas, and children's toys on TV. The vast empire of hip-hop amazes me because I knew hip-hop before it was hip-hop. I was there when it all began. Now let's pause for a moment and notice at number 17 that the purpose here is, what specific purpose does this statement suggest? Well, you write down answers. Again, in our independent practice, the textbook company will be asking you questions. So what do you think she says, what she says there at the end? The vast empire of hip-hop amazes me because I knew hip-hop before it was hip-hop. I was there when it all began. Well, some of you will say, this is really a historical essay. Yes, it is. Write that down. This is an essay that will play the game of history. Not governmental political history, but rather a different kind of political history. Musical political history. Now, let's pay attention to the fact that I have students who will get very upset about the music that a pal is listening to or not listening to. Have you heard the latest album? Yeah, no, I don't listen to that. What is wrong with you? Right? This kind of fascination is a political fascination, but it's a different kind. It's a musical political fascination. By the way, let's point out as well, we mustn't overlook, for your notes, we mustn't overlook the economics involved as well, right? I mean, some people are making serious amounts of money because young people decide to wear certain kind of clothes, listen to certain kinds of music, play certain kinds of video games. Come on, let's not kid ourselves. All of it is in the end about, not all about, but a lot of it is about somebody's getting very wealthy, right? Somebody's getting very wealthy. Let's keep reading. Way back then, in what today's ninth graders might call the ancient 80s, there was no MTV or VH1. We found out about music by listening to the radio, flipping through the stacks at the record store, or buying mixtapes from local DJs at $2 a piece. Back then, we carried combs in our back pockets and clipped long strands of feathers to the belt loops of our designer jeans. We wore our names in cursive gold letters around our necks or in big brass letters on our belt buckles. We picked up words and invented them, calling something that we thought was really cool hot, and something that had a whole lot of life deaf. We didn't know a whole new language was rolling off our tongues as we flipped English upside down and pulled some Spanish and even a few words from Africa into our parlance. Parlance here just means the way we talk. We didn't know that young people for years to come would recycle our fashions and sample the brass lines from our favorite tracks. Number 18 in the blue, the central idea or support. How do these examples help elaborate on Walker's central idea? In other words, already she's talking about the past. Jot down for you, what's the funniest line about her talking about the past, okay? And the things she did when she was younger, okay? Notice, for example, she says, I was a part of a time when you learned about music by going to a record store and you walked in. Now, there's still a few record stores in America, but most of them are usually just in the city. In the day, any mall had a record store. And that's where young people hung out for the most part. Why? Because they wanted to know what was the new music. The new music wasn't anywhere online. There was no online. So the only way you heard about music was either going to the record stores or you listened to the radio. And the radio would play new artists. And then you kind of, danced between the two. Keep reading. We thought we were just being kids and expressing ourselves, showing the grown-ups we were different from them in a way that was safe and fun. In fact, we were at the epicenter of one of America's most significant cultural revolutions, making it happen. Who knew? Not me. Notice the rhetorical devices. What does the author ask? Why does the author ask this question and then answer it? Who knew? Not me. Obviously, the significance of that line is nobody saw you guys coming. Nobody saw it coming that way, right? I mean, there was no way anybody could have predicted that you could carry around on a small handheld device tens of thousands of songs, having access to literally millions of songs if you have the internet, right? Because you have the capacity through Pandora and other kinds of software to be able to listen to all kinds of music, right? All right, I'm at the top of 436. When I moved from Washington, D.C. to the Bronx the summer before 7th grade, I had one box of records, mostly albums I'd ordered from the Columbia Record Club. In 1982, if you promised to buy a record a month for the whole year, the club sent you 8 records for a penny. I had Bruce Springsteen's The River, REO Speedwagon's The Letter, Belladonna by Stevie Nicks, I had Stairway to Heaven by Led Zeppelin, and the soundtrack from the movie Saturday Night Fever, which I played so many times I thought my mother would go crazy from listening to me belt out the lyrics with those lanky, swanky Bee Gees. By the way, it's hilarious to be teaching this kind of essay today now, because most of you have no clue about the titles that were mentioned. But let's do point out, of the titles and the artists that were just mentioned, Bruce Springsteen is mentioned, and there's still an amazingly, think about this, still amazing following of Bruce Springsteen and in our popular culture still. He still is an individual who is somewhat known, we might say, right? And some people still listen to Led Zeppelin, music as well, depending on where, where they're from. Along with my albums, I had loads of 45s, what today we would call singles, little records with just 2 songs on them, that I brought at the record store near my school for just $1 a piece. I had Shakira Khan's I'm Every Woman and Luther Vandross's Never Too Much, Chuck Brown and Soul Searchers' big hit Bustin' Loose. I had Michael Jackson's Rock With You, and even Aretha Franklin's cover of You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman, which I sang along to in the mornings as I styled my hair. If you'd asked me then about rap music, I would have shrugged my shoulders and looked at you like you were crazy. Rap music? What's that? But then I started 7th grade and my whole world turned upside down. Public school, 141. I went to classes with kids from all over the Bronx. There were kids whose families came from Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, and kids whose families came from Russia and China. There were kids who were African American and kids who were Irish American, kids who were Italian American, and kids who were Greek American. There were kids whose families were poor, kids whose families were well off, and kids whose families were somewhere in between. Some were Jewish and others devout Catholics, some were Muslims, some of the Asian kids were even Buddhist. Wow, it's an interesting paragraph in terms of rhetorical devices, like number 21 points out. Notice all the repetitions that are going on there. What effect, asked, what effect does Walker create by using repetition and parallel phrasing to list all of these examples? Well, of course, you could make the argument that it's all this listing that begins to make her point that America is an incredibly complex society with all these different voices, can we use that term? With all these different voices, right? By the way, since we're here, jot down in your notes at 3B, how does this observation work with our study of American history? Do you remember that text, American History, where the young narrator of our story tells us about being at school with all these different kinds of people? By the way, she also in New York, right? The next paragraph. The charge created by so many different elements coming together was palpable. In other words, you could literally feel it or taste it. The school crackled with energy. As you can imagine, things weren't always smooth. There were some pretty entrenched cliques and a few vicious fights in the schoolyard. But there was also so much flavor. You could hear Spanish spoken with a thick New-Yorkian accent to a kid wearing a yarmulke. A seemingly reserved Asian American girl would get out of her parents' car, wait for them to drive off, and then unzip her coat to reveal a fire engine red Adidas sweatsuit. A guy in a preppy button-down shirt would sport gold chains with pendants of every denomination, the Jewish Star of David, the Arabic lettering for Allah, and a shiny gold cross. He was everything that was his stiletto, and everyone gave him props for it. When I got, top of page 437, when I got to 141, the school, I felt like a blank canvas. This is an interesting metaphor. Of course, the figurative language question here is there. In what ways was Walker like a blank canvas? Well, ready to be exposed and to learn lots of things. Nothing had prepared me for the dynamism, the screaming self-expression of the place and its students. For the first few weeks, I secretly studied the habits of the 7th grade and 7th, 8th, and 9th graders with whom I walked the halls and shared the cafeteria. I was transfixed by the way they infused their words with attitude and drama, moving their hands and heads as they spoke. I was captivated by the way many of them walked and ran and joked with each other with confidence and bravado. I noted what they wore and how they wore it. The razor-sharp creases of their Jordache jeans, the spotless sneakers with the laces left loose and untied. By the way, this is kind of like, for your notes, an anthropological study. She literally drops into a new culture and she spends all of her time watching, which begs an interesting question in 3B. Write it down. Your favorite song, your favorite music, your favorite artist, when was the last time or the first time you heard about this individual or this music or whatever, and who turned you on to that? Who in your life began to show you all of these different kinds of voices, right? She says it happened because she was unexpectedly dropped into a brand new culture and kind of blew her mind. Notice she talks about it as being dynamic, right? Slowly, I began to add some of what I saw into my look. I convinced my grandmother to buy me a name chain to wear around my neck, and my stepmother to buy me dark, dyed designer jeans. I bought my first pair of Nike sneakers, red, white, and blue, Air Cortezes, with money I saved from my allowance. One by one, I started to make friends. Diane, Lolita, James, Jesus, Maya. When James and Jesus weren't making fun of me for being so square, they took me to parties on the Grand Concourse, the big boulevard lined with old apartment buildings and department stores that ran through the Bronx. The parties were incredible, filled with young people who didn't drink, smoke, or fight, but who just wanted to dance and laugh and ooh and ah over the scratching sounds and the funky beats the DJs coaxed out of their turntables. By the way, notice number 24, the point of view. What is Walker's perspective on the young people she met at the parties? It's an interesting perspective. I've had many freshmen that think she's making it up when she says, no, we literally just went to we went to the parties just for the music's sake. We didn't go to the parties to actually party. Notice today how that term is maybe a little bit different. When you talk about partying today, you normally don't talk about listening to music, but rather some other kinds of activities. But notice here, in the early days, you literally went to parties to listen to the music, because the music was just starting to be created and shared in this way. A lot of the kids at the parties were breakers, or poppers and lockers, which meant they could break dance, a style of movement that blends the Brazilian martial art of capoeira with a dance called the robot. It incorporates classical dance moves as well. The breakers moved in crews that competed against each other. Standing in a circle, we watched as members of the different groups moonwalked into the center and then hurled themselves to the floor, spinning on their heads, kicking their legs into the air, and making elaborate hand gestures, each one more intricate and aerobatic than the last. Everyone at the party who wasn't breaking was a judge by default, and we registered our scores by clapping and yelling. Now, if you know anything, of course, and we'll get to it in a moment here, about the early phase of rap music, it's very similar. Let's put it in our notes. We have, and anthropologists have pointed this out, we have in youth culture, in the 80s and early 90s, we have competition without bullets. This is central, especially to the inner city. In other words, you have competition where you, instead of fighting, physically fighting, you dance against each other. That's the original, and then later you rap against each other. In other words, instead of killing each other or shooting at each other, you use art to compete. I would write that down. You use art to compete. By the way, that is not a new idea. The Greeks did it in the spring in their Dionysian festivals. And the few extant Greek plays that we have, we know that many of them were given as competition, the greatest plays being awarded a prize. When Lydia and Diane weren't capping on or making fun of my clothes, they were hipping me to Kiss 98.7 and WBLS, the radio stations that had started to slip some of the songs we liked into their rotation. Songs like Planet Rock by Soul Sonic Force and Take Me Home by Lisa Lisa and the Cult Jam. After school and on the weekends, they took me to the street vendors that sold the accessories we all coveted. The big knockoff Porsche sunglasses everybody wanted, but not everybody could afford. And the heavy gold chains people collected around their necks like so many pieces of string. By the way, notice number 26, the central idea and support. How do these examples help support Walker's central idea that the art today, the clothing, the fashion today started way back when? Back then, you didn't go online to buy what you wore. You had to go down to some kind of street vendor. Well, Dee and Diana also, I'm at the top of 438, took me around the city on the bus, familiarizing me with the routes of the MI and M3 and M7, showing me all the different neighborhoods like Little Italy and Chinatown, Bed-Stuy and Harlem. I remember looking out the big sliding glass windows of the bus at the lines drawn in concrete and glass and thinking that while the world outside seems so divided, inside, in my circle, among my friends, those lines didn't seem to exist. Lydia was Dominican and Diane was Puerto Rican. Our friend Mary was Irish American and Lisa was Italian American. Maya's family was from Haiti. Julius's was Russian American. We were different ages with different likes and dislikes, but we were united in our love of hip-hop. Of course, this is central, right? By the way, notice, in all three of our model essays, right? They're all about unity. They're all about harmony, aren't they? They're all about somehow coming together. Think about that. When you are listening to a piece of music on your player, on your phone, you are listening to something that millions and millions of other people your age share. When you're playing a video game, you're involved in an activity that millions of other people are also involved with, whether you realize it or not. It somehow brings us all together. We loved the dope beats that the ever-changing and ever-expanding lexicon, the outrageous dance move, the cocky swagger, the feeling that we were part of something dynamic and fresh that was bigger than any one of us. That world, that other realm that we created on the streets and in our minds, that streamed from the radio into the privacy of our bedrooms and coursed between us as we talked on the phone, that was where we lived. Again, the rhetorical devices component here being pointed out at number 28. Analyze the effect Walker creates through the use of repetition and parallelism. Does she emphasize key ideas, stir emotions, something else, explain? In other words, it's hard not to even read that